Well, joining me now is a longtime friend of mine, Mike McFaul. He's the former ambassador to Russia, among other stints in and out of government. He's at Stanford University at the Hoover Institute, and he's author of a new book. He's author of a lot of books. This is what, right, these days, but his latest is called Autocrats versus Democrats, and in some ways, essentially trying to, I think, you tell me, trying to explain the world these days. Like, how is the world being divvied up? And I guess where I'd want to jump before we get into some of the nitty gritty of the current situation is everything old new again? Meaning, is the world back to where it was pre-World War II?
Well, Chuck, first, thanks for having me. Second, I have written a lot of books. You're right, but this is my last book. This is my most ambitious book ever.
Famous last word. My last book. It's like a politician saying my last election, my last book, the last time I'm doing this. Okay,
I'm tying my hands by saying it on the public record because it killed me. This is a hard book to write. It took me many years. And I do other things, as you know. I run an institute here at Stanford. I teach at Stanford, but it's ambitious in a good way because I try to answer your question. And the original question that I started with, when it goes back to 2017 when President Trump first won, and he brought in his national security team, and they wrote a very, I would say, historic national security strategy. H.R. McMaster at the time was the national security advisor. He kind of spearheaded it. Whether the president himself read it or not, I don't know. I've heard that he didn't. We'll come back to him later. But it was a statement that said that old post-Cold War order with American hegemony and everybody wanting to be part of the democratic world was over. And we'd entered a new war era of great power competition. And I thought they were right about that. But then and I would say that the debate in Washington especially, circled around, are we in a new Cold War with China and its sidekick Russia? And, as an academic, I wanted to answer that question as a hypothesis. What's the data to support that or not? And, I know a little bit about the Cold War. I wrote my PhD about Cold War competition, so it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. But I answered in a pretty complex way, which is why the book's 500 pages long. But you should know it used to be 1,200 pages long. So I did a lot of cuts to make it more accessible.
So you could have had volume 2 and then come out with a second edition.
Well, there was talk about that. Do one on China, one on Russia. I didn't want to do that. But the very complex answer that I have to your question, but I'm going to get to the 30s as well, before the World War II, is it a new Cold War? Yes. Is it a new Cold War? No. I answer it in both ways, which is to say there are some things that are similar and some things that are different. And similarities, two great powers, China and Russia, China and the United States. Ideological contests, most certainly. That's why my book is called Autocrats versus Democrats. Different conceptions of the world order, absolutely. And yet on the different side, I think they're even bigger and more important. So yes, it's an ideological struggle, but it is not to the same intensity as it was with the Soviets. I think that is overstated, especially with my Republican colleagues that say we're in an existential fight, and this is a bigger challenge than ever before in the history of the United States. That's just wrong, in my view. Second, big difference, complex difference with pluses and minuses, is our economies are highly intertwined. We didn't have that with the Soviets. But the biggest differences are about us, Chuck. The biggest differences are here in the United States. We today have a level of polarization that, we might have had it in the late 60s, early 70s, but I think it's actually more acute today. That's different. That weakens us in dealing with our adversaries abroad. And the other piece that's different is we're in a new era of isolationism, most prominent in the Republican Party, but not only, very growing within the Democratic Party as well. And that piece reminds me more of the 1930s than the Cold War, because during the Cold War, there was a broad consensus, kind of 45-yard lines, right? It wasn't extremes. And that's not true. We had our communists. I'm a Stanford guy. We had our communists up at Berkeley. They were there, but they were pretty marginal. And there was a kind of broad consensus that in order to prevail in the Cold War, we had to be engaged in the world. That is no longer true. I mean, that sentiment, which we see in opinion polls, and I feel when I'm out talking about the book around the country, that's no longer true today. That's a big difference.
So I appreciate the way you address the question. I will confess that I meant it in a different way. And I'll tell you what I'll tell you what I meant. Look, I've been tackling this current era and polarization through my own lens of history, more domestic than international. But I keep coming back to the same conclusion, and I can back it up with different data. 6 of our last 7 presidential elections have been decided by 5 points or less.
Yes.
In the entire 20th century, we only had 5 elections decided by 5 points or less.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Okay. And it's one of those you just like. It is like there's something has radically changed this century.
Right.
When you look at the 19th century, we had 2 different periods where we had first of all, we had 2 different periods where we elected 5 one-term presidents in a row. We did it at the end of the century. We did it sort of in the run-up between Jackson and Lincoln. I'm obsessed with the fact we had 7 presidents in 28 years between Jackson and Lincoln. Only one was due to death, right? So it was parties were consistently throwing, and it was all, every election was about the same thing. I can bring the country together.
Right.
Okay, we'll try this, right? And it was different things. We'll try a Democrat from the North, right? That was Franklin Pierce, all sorts of different things. What's hard, and you look at our partisan media today, it looks a lot like the partisan media of the late 19th century, early 20th century.
Right.
Is it possible the Cold War era was simply an outlier period in world history? That there is no other period like it. Yes. And what we're dealing with today is no different than the 19th century globe. We had great powers then, right? No different than the 15th century. We can keep going back. And in some ways, the globe in human history has been defined by great powers only in this unique 60-year period where you and I had the luxury of growing up in it, thinking this is normal. And I think, because I sit there and I wonder how much it's almost like, is this bad data, right? If this were numbers, we'd say, this is outlier data, throw it out.
Yeah. Well, that's a great observation, Chuck. And I hope you're writing your book on that topic. That's a great, seriously, that is a great topic. Well, and I don't think a lot of Americans know, including me, by the way. I have a lot of books. You can see them.
Yeah, I see that.
I don't know that history the way you just described it. That would make a great book. But your point is,
you saying that. I'll make sure we'll clip this and I'll send it to all the publishers here in New York.
You should. But you're onto something. Absolutely, I agree. And I also hope you're wrong. So let me.
Yeah, I hope I'm wrong too. I do.
So there's 2 things that are going on, I would say, in the Cold War period. One is we have an adversary that everybody understands is an adversary, existential threat, all that stuff. And I did, to write this new book, I went through all that history again. I used to know it, but I had to relearn it. And that helped to create some sort of consensus and unity in the United States. We had this word containment. That was our strategy towards the Soviets. It was pretty elastic, right? The way Reagan defined containment and Nixon was very different, but it still was this thing. It brought us together, Democrats and Republicans. There was a lot of consensus on foreign policy, partly because of the Soviet threat. But the other piece, it was partly because we were so powerful, the United States of America. And that part where we
were the great power.
We were the great power. And in retrospect, the Soviets were not as great as we were. We didn't know that always at the time, right? We overestimated the Soviet threat. By the way, I think we're doing a little bit of that with the Chinese threat today. But it was our power that was this organizing principle, not just vis-a-vis the Soviets, but around the world. Bob Kagan has this great book. I'm going to forget the name of it. Oh, The Jungle Grows Back.
Mm.
which is basically
Laws of the jungle.
right.
Foreign policy. Yeah.
When we became the hegemon, the jungle receded. But
Mm-hmm.
now that we're falling back, and he wrote this book like a decade ago, not in the Trump era, the jungle's growing back. And his argument is just like yours, that this is a unique period in history. And now we're back to normal, Hobbesian, anarchic, dog eat dogs politics, great power politics. If I analytically, I think there's a lot of evidence to support that hypothesis. So
Right.
if I have my analytic professorial hat on, I see those trends. But if I have my normative hat on, I still want to fight for a different world than that, because that world is not a great world. People forget. When I teach a course on American foreign policy here at Stanford, I start it with a map of Europe. It's a 1,000-year map of history of Europe in 6 minutes. And what you see is that, borders moving all the time, right? Like, Napoleon comes on the scene, the Nazis comes on the scene, the Soviets come on the scene. You go back farther, it's the Mongol hordes, right? It's when we use the word chaos, it's a lot of chaos. It's a lot of killing. Millions and millions of people die. We fought World War II to end that. And by the way, the movie does kind of freeze in 45, right? Borders in Europe, there's some changes a little bit. And then 89, we get some changes. But it does kind of freeze because we agree we don't want to live in that world. And even with the Soviets, we agree we don't want annexation. But we're creeping back to that, of course, with Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. But I just don't think that's a great world to live in. And,
I agree. Yeah.
And I think we got to fight to all. And that is the major reason why I wrote this book, to fight to renew, reform, of course, all that, but another form of liberal internationalism, so that we don't go back to that world.
So the problem, right, that you're facing, and well, frankly, that all small d Democrats are facing, is that there's not unity about this in our own country. And until we have a unity about small d democracy in our country, we can't export it. We can't be the beacon. I mean, I'm looking at certain things like our just what appears to be indiscriminate bombing of boats in the Caribbean. And I say indiscriminate, perhaps there's intelligence to support it. I'm hoping our members of Congress demand it.
Yes.
We've not seen it with the people. The point being is our behavior is not small d democratic behavior here.
Correct.
And we just lost whatever moral authority we had to lecture any other country, including one that you wrote about here called Russia.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And, my book is called Autocrats versus Democrats. The title, China, Russia, America, and the New Global Disorder, right? So analytically, I'm agreeing with you. And by the way, I wrote most of this book, obviously, before our last election. I had about 3 weeks to scramble to do some updating. Yeah. And, oftentimes it's not clear what side of that divide we're on. President Trump, he doesn't define the world in autocrats versus Democrats. He likes strong leaders versus weak leaders, right?
Yeah. I feel like it's a movie version. I call him I feel like he's a movie mobster, meaning it's not the real. I think the real mob is real dangerous and there's a lot of things and it shouldn't be glorified. But the movie mob, right? Movie mobsters. I think Trump sees himself as the head of that kind of benevolent movie mobster family. And this is just how you do it. Sometimes you do things ethically, but sometimes you don't, depending on the situation.
Right. Well, and, that can work in the short term, as I write about.
It worked in the Middle East. I think it's the only place it works. Maybe it works with Putin. If he would treat Putin the way he treat Bibi, maybe he could have similar outcomes. But it feels like the only places where his style might be an asset, not a liability.
Well, it definitely doesn't work with allies. Yeah. So, as I write about, and, you can, if you're really powerful, I grew up in Butte, Montana, pretty rough place, a mining town. And Eddie and his gang, for 3 years would try to beat me up every day. And they were stronger than me and more powerful. And they could coerce me to do things and I would do it if I had to for survival purposes. But did I like it? No. Okay. And when I got strong enough that I could push back on it, I did. And that, that's not a good way to do transactions. Always coercion. And Trump, he always thinks about power in terms of coercive power. He doesn't think about cooperative power. When
earning trust, or like, look what he did to the Argentinian people. Well, here's your loan, but you better support my guy or I'm pulling the money. And you're like,
that's all. That's coercion. And
right.
The threats to the allies about they should share more of the burden. There's a different way to do that. And eventually people get tired of being coerced, as I did on the streets of Butte, Montana. And, if we were the only hegemon, that would be one thing. But China's offering a different world order. They're offering something else. And so I just think this is not a long-term strategy. The one he's doing is just not a long-term strategy. But there's another piece to it that is equally, unnerving for me. That if you go back to the Cold War, and I'm going to oversimplify, of course, but it was kind of red team versus blue team, right? We knew it was the communists and the capitalists, the free world, and the the autocratic world. And remember those maps, sides would flip, right? So Angola became red, and Nicaragua became red. At least
everybody was defined by it, right? Why was Pakistan an ally and India? You had the unaligned countries, those 3 or 4, right? Your South Africa's, your India, your Brazil.
Right. So what's new today is that the fight between autocrats and democrats is not just between countries like it was during the Cold War. It's actually within countries. And Putin and Putinism as a set of illiberal, nationalist, anti-democratic ideas, of which he's had for a long time, and he's invested in propagating those for a long time. I think we really have been sleeping on this. I have a whole chapter on it in the book where we just think, oh, he's just some transactional thug. And when I was in the government, that's the way many of our senior leadership referred to him. And my point is, you can be a transactional thug and an ideologue at the same time. Think of Stalin. And he's both of those things. And what he has done through Russia Today and NGOs that reach out to our NGOs and the Russian Orthodox Church that reach out to our religious communities with the same ideology, he's now helped. And that's also happened organically. It's not just all from Moscow. But now there's fights, within Hungary, within Italy, within Germany, within France, and within, as you know better than I, within our country. And so you have now Americans that, and even sometimes our president, by the way, he's all over the place these days on Putin. But there are millions of Americans that ideologically are closer to Putin than they are to me, even though I'm an American, right? So you have one of their main ideologues, Chuck, in Russia Today, his name's Alexander Dugin. He's one of the main ideologues of Putinism. He appears regularly on InfoWars. He is a beloved guest of that podcast, of that show.
Is he a Tucker guy too?
Yes.
Yeah,
Tucker has interviewed him. I forgot about that. They have also interacted. So that's different, right? And then of course, therefore, to support small d Democrats abroad when we're doing these things near to impossible. And what I would also add to this, because it's on my mind, because Machado just won the Nobel Peace Prize, right, in Venezuela. Here at Stanford, we're quite connected to democratic movements all over the world, including Venezuela. One of her closest colleagues was here at Stanford at a summer program I run during the elections that they won, that were stolen from them. And then the Venezuelans canceled his passport. So he's been stranded here at Stanford ever since. Those people want us to be involved.
Right. Am I wrong not to be extraordinarily that the Nobel Committee did us all, that this was a good, that this was a good pick.
Fantastic.
That this was sort of, they found somebody that wasn't going to divide us. Like, I am just so excited, and I'm glad the Trump administration's excited. There's something about her, and there's something about, it feels like, sometimes the Nobel Committee rewards the past. Yes. And sometimes they give you something for now. And this felt like they gave us something
Could
for
not
now.
agree more, 100%. And you're right about that past rewarding stuff.
Hmm.
Let's not name names, but they do
No, but
often.
yeah, yeah.
This is not that. She's still
No,
fighting. She's still fighting for democracy. And brilliantly, in my view, her messaging to the Trump administration
she's been terrific.
afterwards could not have been better.
Yeah, she's been terrific there. Sorry, I interrupted you on that, but I just wanted to set that. I mean, I just think that this feels, this feels like, this just feels righteous, right? You just, sometimes a moment is righteous, right? This feels righteous.
Could not agree more.
There's a reason results matter more than promises. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/Toddcast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win.
So this is one of those moments with Venezuela where we're going to be on the side of the Democrats here. But is it because of democracy?
Well, the tragedy of Venezuela, the tragedy's inside. And, in my opinion, we should have done more when they had that electoral breakthrough. They documented it was falsified. And, the Biden administration and the whole free world should have leaned in more. I just think
it was kind of feckless. What more could we? I mean, we didn't do anything because I think there was a fear of doing it. That other than rhetoric, it would mean, maybe we would have to, move carriers or do something like that. And Biden just wasn't willing to do that. What's your sense?
They had a lot on their plate, and I don't want to say that doing more would have overturned Maduro, but they could have done sanctions. They could have been more aggressive. We didn't need to do military action, but when I think of like the Orange Revolution in 2004, which was a very similar situation in Ukraine, where the Democrats, small d Democrats, documented that it was falsified.
Yeah.
We sent Senator Lugar there and said, we're not recognizing this election. And then we got involved in negotiating. The Europeans did. But that train has left the station. That is not there.
Yeah, well, that's the story of Latin America. We never have we always have something else on our plate before we're going to tackle that. It is as a guy who grew up in Miami, this is why they resent us. This is why they resent us. And hey, we never focus on their problems first. It always takes a backseat.
Well, there's something to that.
Yeah.
But here's the irony or tragedy also of what's going on with the Trump administration. So President Trump talked to Machado, right? She's the leader of the Venezuelan opposition. And that's great. But what I think a lot of Americans don't know is the NGOs that have been working with the Venezuelan opposition for decades, groups like the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute.
The two arms, I've done a little bit on them. These are the two international arms of our domestic major parties, the Democratic Party, which overseas, have been in the past very simpatico.
Exactly.
I don't know how simpatico it is these days, but it has been.
It still is. It still is. I used to work for NDI, and I'm on their board. And but all these organizations that help small d Democrats and independent media, President Trump just shut them down. He just closed the United States Agency for International Development. He's going after the National Endowment for Democracy, and we just can't compete with the Chinese if we don't support those that are ideologically aligned with freedom, liberty, democracy. And I chose those words very precisely, Chuck, because this is a nonpartisan thing. Freedom liberty tends to be a Republican word. Democracy tends to be a Democratic word. I think they're all the same. And we got to be in this fight in the long run, or we're going to be in trouble.
No, and I guess the question is, we just got to run a better persuasion campaign of why democracy around the world benefits us. I mean, I look at this weird strain of anti-NATO fervor inside the right, and I'm sitting there going, look, in the 19th century, we would have just colonized Europe.
Yes.
As the great power.
Yeah.
And we would be responsible for Social Security for all these people, and responsible. Here was a case where Europe was essentially, we had I hate to be this cynical about it, the modern version of colonialism, which was we were their security blanket.
Yes.
And it was working out pretty well for everybody.
It was.
Why would we want to give that up? I mean, the ability to essentially have countries without having to be responsible for governing these countries, and yet they were under our sphere of influence. I mean, to just be totally looking at it a cynical way, it was working, and it was working quite well.
100%. And, my lessons from the Cold War for what we should do today at the top of my list in my book talk is allies. That was our superpower during the Cold War. It remains so today. And to add to your list, we also did an incredible amount of economic business with Europe. We continued to do so. It was win-win for both sides. And to undermine that is just not strategic at all. And, I'm not giving up. Like, there's a lot of people in my world that have given up and say, we'll never go back to thinking about supporting democratic ideals or allies or trade.
We'll go back, but we're probably going to have to go through something nearly catastrophic in order to sober ourselves up. I mean, right? I have this dark joke these days where I'm short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic, and I say in 1939 I'd have said I'm short-term pessimistic, and long-term optimistic, and by 1946 I'd have been right. But a lot of bad stuff happened between 1939 and 1946. And it feels as if, unfortunately, we're going to have a near, something bad has to happen. People have to feel the pain of the hot stove.
Yeah, tragically, I think you're right. And, the 30s is an excellent metaphor for the moment that we're in now.
Is the 30s or the 20s? Well, the 20s fascinate me because of the industry and government got so intertwined in the 20s.
Well, that's true.
And we're watching some of that now. You have arguably have a front row seat out there in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And that didn't end well either.
Well, you're right. We start with the 20s. We're in the late 20s now. And if the analogy is there, I mean, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And it feels like that. And the pivot that they all had, all these companies out here, with the Trump administration. And you're right. I interact with all these folks, and I knew them back when, Chuck. I knew them, and they had different ideas.
Do they have ideologies, or are they just transactionalists? Is that really what we found out about Silicon Valley?
There's a range. I think some are just, it's about business interests, and we got to do what's right for the company. I think there are some that, I think of a guy like Reid Hoffman, who I think is much more thoughtful about the world and understands the dangers. And then there are just, some have changed, and that happened.
I'd love to see Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel debate.
Well, funny you say that, because I arranged that debate.
Did you really?
Stanford,
I would love to see that.
About 8 or 9 years ago, we had a program where we were trying to bring together different perspectives, and I was there's this guy, Neil Ferguson, who's at the Hoover Institution. And it ended up not working out because it's hard to do these things. But we started it. Neil was, the charismatic. It was kind of like, remember Hannity and Colmes? You're old enough to remember Hannity and Colmes?
Yeah. Hannity.
I was Colmes.
And Colmes. Right. Yeah, I know.
So I was Colmes to Neil.
I think we called that the Washington Generals and the Harlem Globetrotters, right? That's how that worked. Yeah.
But, Neil is a very charismatic guy. And we're friends. And we don't always agree.
Don't sell yourself short. You're pretty charismatic.
But that was our idea. And the best one we did was Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel. And
interesting.
It was extraordinary. And it had the virtue that they were college kids together here at Stanford. So
so they were friendly. They had a relationship.
Yes,
huh?
and they're both super smart guys, and we need more of that. They are not, to what I understand. I haven't seen Peter for a while, but I don't think they're doing many of those events these days, and we need
Feels
more.
like everybody's closing off. Everybody's retreating right now. Do you feel it in academia? Fear of debate right now? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fear of debate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even fear of me, Chuck, speaking on campuses,
Wow.
there's a definite, sensitivity to anything that might sound partisan. And, I'm very clear. In fact,
because apparently the definition of partisan now is anything somebody disagrees with. I'm sort of right. We're living. This is where I sit here and go, hey, we live in a free country.
Yeah.
Still. And yet, do you feel comfortable debating in this country right now?
It's tricky. I mean, what I try to do militantly, and I even wrote a piece about this on Substack to start our school year here. It's how I teach at Stanford, and I wrote to explain, because I published something. This is my 30th year at Stanford, by the way. So
wow,
starting my
I got to take what you take. It's proof California living's good. You don't look like a 30-year professor.
Well, thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. Going to my reunion, my 40th reunion on Friday, Chuck, here at Stanford.
Wow.
When I was a kid. But I put something up, and the usual crap about wokeness and brainwash. And the way I teach all my classes are about why questions. Why is there great power competition today versus not? Why do some countries become democratic versus not? And you set them up as hypotheses, and then I compel my students to debate.
Yeah.
You pick lotteries and you get numbers, and then you have to take certain positions.
Yep.
And by doing that, by the way, they're arguing a hypothesis that need not necessarily be their own belief system, right? So I free them of having to all that I feel, I want, that I feel that. Whenever sentences start that way, it's going to be complicated. But then, for every class, sometimes before, sometimes after, we like to say, okay, we're out of the classroom setting, and ask me anything, and we're going to talk about what I believe. And I think there's a way to separate out beliefs and science.
I do this. I have this class I teach for USC, this cohort, How Washington Works, and it's a pretty bipartisan group of students, and has been a couple semesters now. And you can do this. And this is what I want to tell I do think I do sense some professors spend time lecturing about what they believe rather than helping their students come to their beliefs.
Exactly.
My son said something about, he's taken this one political science class, and he goes, I really like the professor because he's not telling me how I'm supposed to think.
Right.
He's giving me the information and explaining how each side thinks about it. And it's like, that doesn't seem to be a difficult thing to ask for from a professor. And by the way, if you're an expert, you're going to have an opinion on which side is right.
Right.
That I expect, but I want to hear the understanding of each side of the argument.
Well, so your son's getting a good education. That's the way it's supposed to be. And for those that know some of my debates about NATO expansion in Ukraine and Russia, second week of my class on great power competition is John Mersheimer at the University of Chicago. We could not disagree more in terms of our theories of international politics. But I want my students to read John. And by the way, Chuck, I did a poll last time I taught it. The majority of my class actually agreed with Mersheimer and not me, even after 12 weeks of me. So, but that's the way it's got to be. That's the way it's got to be.
Yeah, no, and I assume, but when you, I want to get back to your book, because I want to get back to Europe here a second. So we got, I know we don't have too much time left. Is the only beneficiary of what's happened over the last 10 years been Europe? And I say this in that I feel like there's a strength in the EU that didn't exist 10 years ago, didn't exist 20 years ago.
Yeah.
There is now, look, each of these countries have their own polarizing debates that look like ours, right? The UK, France, Italy, Germany. We're seeing it pop up everywhere in Western democracies. Don't get me wrong. But the collective action of the European Union has been quite impressive.
Yes.
And in some ways, they're like, okay, America's not going to be here anymore. We've got to take matters into our own hands. And there's been a ton more cooperation than I expected. I think we all thought Europe would fracture without us being the glue.
That's a great observation. I agree. It of course started when Putin invaded, or to be more correct, he invaded Ukraine in 2014, and that war persisted. Our president sometimes forgets that the war went on the entire first term of the Trump administration, but then he escalated. The full-scale invasion was 2022, and that helped to bring Europe together without question. That was the first big event.
Right.
But the second big event was the re-election of President Trump. And I was at the Munich Security Conference when the Vice President J.D. Vance, came and lectured them about democracy. It was a pretty shocking speech. The Europeans were in shock. And that's in the hallways. The whole conversation was, all right, we are now alone. We have to get our act together.
Because they saw the next president in J.D. Vance's comments, didn't they? They weren't looking at that as,
that's
if
right.
That's what the vice president is saying. As far as the Europeans are concerned, they just assume he's the next most likely person to be president. And by the way, odds are that's correct.
Right.
Okay. Right now, I mean, he may not, it may be only a 20% chance, but no one has a higher percent. Right. He is the most likely next president of the United States. So the Europeans, that's how they viewed that speech, I assume.
That's right. And so they did two or three really big important things. So one, greater unity. And we've seen the emergence of some new leaders that's helped, especially in Germany. But even
I think the Italian prime minister, I mean, I think a lot of people weren't sure about her, and she's had a nice stiff spine on this.
I am with you 100%. Meloni is fantastic. I was just in Italy about a month ago at a conference that was about Europe, but also about Italian politics. She was not there this time, but many of her leadership was. But
I mean, she's still in power, which says a lot.
And they were talking about that. I'm not an expert on Italian politics. Learned a lot in a week. And, they've had more stability with their governments under Meloni than they've had, for most of the earlier period.
They're more stable than France right now.
And also the southern part of Europe is growing at a higher rate than the northern part. That's also new. That didn't used to be the case. But she's been fantastic. Another guy who's just in Washington this week, President Alexander Stubb from Finland. Not many people know Alex. I know him personally. He's a big thinker. He's got a book just like mine coming out soon. They're similar themes. I blurbed it. I'm not so sure he wants that blurb now. This is before the election that I blurbed.
Yeah, because he's got to have relations with Trump.
But he's good at that. And what I would say is two things. That one, more unity for sure. Two, greater clarity on why they have to stop Putin's army in Ukraine, because of we're seeing, the threats are growing, and that's been happening for 2 or 3 years, but now they're all focused on it, right? Sikorsky, by the way, is another one of these new leaders, deputy prime minister, foreign minister of Poland, fantastic, big think kind of guy. But then three, they are collectively dealing with President Trump, I think, in a more sophisticated way than they did the first time around.
Yeah.
And, when Trump went,
the Democratic Party could learn a lesson or two on that. By the way,
yes, but you know more about that than I do. But Trump decided to meet with Putin in Alaska, give him the big summit, and roll out the red carpet. And I just want to say, I support the president for trying to end this war. He's putting effort in. I give him credit for that. Number two, he's engaging with the Russians. You have to do that to try to end the war. I support that. That's controversial in my world, but I support that. And we're talking about a guy, Putin, who I believe is evil. He's killed friends of mine. He's killing Ukrainians every single night. You still have to talk to him. But the mistake of Alaska was it was all about the meeting and not about the substance. And, he should read George Shultz's memoirs about how, you got to have an agenda for these meetings. And you don't have to check your values at the door to meet with thugs like Putin. But then I said on camera, for NBC News, by the way, I'm still with them for a little bit longer. I said, whoever had the brilliant idea of having all the Europeans come and meet with Zelensky, with the president 2 days after that Alaska summit, that was a brilliant idea. I don't know whose idea it was, but I can tell you that the White House claimed it was their idea and put out, I don't get quoted by the White House too much, Chuck, these days, but they put out a press statement saying McFaul believes that Trump was brilliant to organize that meeting. I'm pretty sure I know that it wasn't a Trump idea, but it was a really brilliant thing. And they're showing that they can work together. That's a big accomplishment.
So the upside of Europe, why do I feel nervous that even though there's a need for collectivism in Asia, we're not going to get it? And this is, I guess, I need to get you out of here on this, but considering it felt like the Quad was going to be the beginning of something.
Yes. Yeah.
And now we've got a trade war with India. I'm intrigued by the new leader in Japan. I'm very intrigued to see how she does. There seems to be right. And it'll be interesting to see them doubling their defense spending is a BFD, I think,
I agree
on that front. But it feels like we're a long way away from some sort of collective security agreement there.
So I agree. And tragically, I agree. In my book, I write about, so the book's about, Cold War, great power competition. I look at power, ideology, global order. But then because there was this debate about the Cold War, I have 3 chapters of prescriptions. One is about mistakes, by the way, Chuck, during the Cold War, which a lot of Americans forget because we won the Cold War, so we forget about our mistakes.
Sure.
But, I coached 3rd grade basketball for years. And when you win, everybody forgets about when your star player fouled out.
There's still stuff on film you need to fix. Yeah,
exactly. And so I won't go through that now, but we did do a lot of big mistakes. We can't repeat them. And we are tiptoeing towards some of them. But the successes, then I have a whole chapter on successes. And the one is about allies and how we got our allies together in Europe. And I pretty provocatively in this book say we need more collective security and even a NATO-like structure in Asia to deal with the rise of China today. And I think we do need that. And I spend more, I can't go to Russia anymore, so I spend a lot of time in Asia these days. And tragically, it's moving in exactly the opposite direction, partly because of Trump, partly because the more leftists took over in South Korea, partly because of the crisis inside Japan, the trading prime ministers. But we are not there yet. And I'm nervous about that. I was just in Taiwan a few months ago. They are nervous about it too.
They should be.
They just feel like we might sell them out. And I think that would be a big disaster.
I thought Scott Bessent put it on the sellout list. I mean, the negotiating list.
Yes.
Sorry. I mean, that looked like we know where that's headed. Sadly, I think that's going to take hostile action by China before everybody says, hey, wait, maybe we ought to put together a coalition. Well,
and back to your analogizing from before, that might be the wake-up thing that we need, tragically, because as the 30s prove, as you know better than I, but we're asleep and we put our head in the sands and we said, Italians went into Ethiopia, nobody knew where that was. Japanese went into China, and everyone's like, why do we care? And even when Stalin and Hitler both went into Poland, in 1939, and then Stalin went into a bunch of other countries, still millions of Americans said, we don't have that's not, where is that? That's far away. It reminds me so much of what I hear about Ukraine. And it took 41 to wake us up. It might have to be something much more kinetic with the Chinese to make us realize that we can't prevail in the 21st century without being engaged.
Well, the only region we didn't do was the Middle East. And I know I got to let you go. So I'm not going to, I could one last question you, but it's tough.
Well, I'll just say one quick thing. Some good news. So, I give the president and his team some credit there. They got a long ways to go. But we need to celebrate good news when it happens. And this week was good news for the president.
Is it his skill set uniquely suited to the Middle East? Oddly. Do you buy that theory?
To your earlier point, this works with those leaders. And Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'm not so sure those methods are transferable to guys like Putin and Xi.
No, that's, I think, that's the real lesson learned there, because those guys still have, they actually do have ideologies.
Correct.
The other
and they
guys
have power. They are not dependent on us.
The other guys are really transactionalist. Anyway.
Yes, I agree.
Mike, it is a big book. I still got to finish making my way through it, but it is definitely a readable book, which that's always important. So well done, my friend.
Appreciate that. Thanks for having me.